Good morning, everybody. So who stayed up too late? Oh, the rest of you are lying. No, here's the thing. If I walk up here with my sunglasses on, you know it was a 3 o'clock in the morning night, okay? But I think I'm getting a little bit too old for that crap, so went to bed at a reasonable hour last night. All right, so our first speaker today he's a screenwriter, documentary producer, network news producer. He's developing a screenplay called The Asylum. He's worked on a screenplay called Hynek Blue Book, which was actually his research and paper for his master's degree. He is owner of Will Go Media. He's a freelance producer for NBC, ABC, on the Weather Channel. He is a professor emeritus at Rogers State University. He is a news manager and reporter, or has been, at 5 different television stations around the country, including KTVI in St. Louis. His education is he has a master's degree in communication and a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism and speech from the University of Texas. And he was a dear friend to the late, great Dr. Hynek, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He was a colleague of his. They worked together on the UFO phenomenon years ago, and he's going to tell us all about that. Please join me in welcoming Lee Williams.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, how would you like to start the morning with an adventure? It's an adventure that I had 42 years ago this month when I got to travel with Dr. J. Allen Hynek to do a series of stories in southern New Mexico about UFOs. So it's important to note that Dr. J. Allen Hynek was first and foremost an astrophysicist. He was a hard sciences physicist kind of guy. And the reason I bring it up is as we progress through this strange world of UFOs, you'll see that he maintained his credentials, his knowledge, his training as a physicist, as an astrophysicist and astronomer all the way through all the mysteries. So astrophysicists try to understand the universe and its contents, including stars, planets, galaxies, celestial objects, by applying the laws of physics, and that's what he did till the end. Dr. Hynek and World War II, his beginnings, helped develop the proximity fuse during World War II. So that's when the bombs were dropped from airplanes. They would blow up above the ground. Proximity fuse, proximity to the ground, boom. If they hit into the ground, a lot of the explosive force would have been lost in the ground. So it's one of the inventions that's credited with helping to win World War II. In 1941, he meets Miriam Curtis. She was a fine astronomy student at Ohio Wesleyan University, but they married, had 5 children. In those days, the women gave up their careers usually to the men, and that's what happened in this case. But she was very well thought of, brilliant in her own right. In 1956, Dr. Hynek was selected to become the associate director of the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. Now that's a big deal. It's how Harvard was involved in that. So at this point, we know that he is one of the foremost astronomers in the world, which is good because in 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik, and it threw the Western world into a frenzy because the Soviets were ahead of us, and nobody knew what all that meant in terms of maybe even nuclear weapons and other things. So the Smithsonian Astrophysical Museum was tasked with the idea of how we're going to track our satellites once we get them up there, and that's Dr. Hynek at the top of the globe there. It's very crude, right? You get a cord, you stretch it around the globe, and you try to figure out how to track the satellites as they circle the Earth, where you're going to put your cameras and observers and these kinds of things. So that's what this was. And you see the heading at the top right, the satellite. Why the Reds got it first. What happens next? And that's exactly the way the country felt. We were at the height of the Cold War. and Russia was no longer seen as our friend. So let's back up. We were at 1957. Let's back up to 1946 and see how Dr. Hynek got involved with UFOs. In 46, he was teaching astronomy at Ohio State University. It was near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And that's where a couple of officers were charged with finding somebody to help explain UFOs. So they went to the nearest university, the nearest astronomer, and said, hey, would you be interested in helping us explain some of these things? There's got to be natural explanations for these lights in the sky. And in that Project Sign was born in 1948. It morphed briefly into what was called Project Grudge, and then the one that you know in 1952, Project Blue Book. And Dr. Hynek was the astronomical consultant to Project Blue Book from 52 to 1969. So his total involvement with UFO research and seeing all the reports firsthand, the ones that they would share with him, and he always felt there were ones they would not share with him, but he saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports as part of Project Blue Book. So he was already starting to become famous because of Sputnik and being one of the authorities to speak about that, because of Project Blue Book, and what really sent him over the top was becoming the technical consultant to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And there's his cameo. I don't know how many of you, the first time you saw this, knew who he was, but he's one of the people, as the ship is landing and people and creatures are coming out, he steps forward, and with his characteristic, he always had his pipe. And would be exactly him. Distinguished professor, goatee, the whole bit, stereotypical, and with that pipe. So at this point, he is really pretty famous guy, and he's traveling the world doing speeches. A lot of his appearances were not paid. A lot of them were paid. He was paid to become guest speaker all over the world. So this is where I come in, KOB TV in Albuquerque in 1982. I was a reporter there, and I somehow got to do a series of reports traveling with Dr. Hynek in New Mexico. So we were actually out for a week. We went to southern New Mexico. We loaded Dr. Hynek in the back of a Buick, the illustrious Dr. Hynek. It was hey, climb in. He did. And so we went. This looks like a Spielberg movie, but these are real people that we interviewed. Real people we interviewed along the way. So what we're going to get to see today is how Dr. Hynek investigates UFOs in a case with multiple witnesses in multiple locations, all independent of one another. So this video, done in May of 1982 is when it aired. It actually was my last story at KOB TV, and this is the first time it's been seen in 42 years.
UFOs. Tens of thousands of people in almost every country in the world have seen them. Many sightings turn out to be meteors or planes or weather balloons. But at least a fifth of all UFOs remain a mystery. Among the very best and the very most credible kinds of UFO sightings are the kinds that are observed by several different people in several different locations, all independent of one another. Well, here around the tiny town of Reserve in western New Mexico, we found some people exactly like that. It was December 8th, 1981, only 6 months ago. Alma Hobbs and her two children were driving southwest on State Highway 12. The time was 7:30, after dark, but in the moonlit sky, Alma says she could clearly see a cigar-shaped UFO twice the length of a football field. Along with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who has become the world's leading authority on UFOs, we asked Alma to retell what she saw.
It was gliding toward the southwest, just slow, and I thought it might have been a blimp, but it had come up much too fast to have been a blimp, but it changed speeds just instantaneously. It was already traveling backwards, say, if you counted 1, 2, 3.
How close did the jet get to the object?
The jets was, when we first saw the jet was fairly close to it, but then the object just moved away from the jet and made this maneuver, this turn, and left the jet behind.
A mile further down the road, Dan Lopscomb stood in front of his Whispering Pines restaurant and saw exactly the same thing.
the speed was just in a blinking of an eye. You just looked at it 1 second, and the next second it was turned, and the jet that was behind it could not make the turn that quick.
15 miles to the northwest in Luna, Lance Swap and his brother Neil watched a UFO pass over the mountain behind their house with a military jet in hot pursuit. No military base in the region admits having a jet in this area on that night. Maybe it's all a hoax. But then again, a lack of cooperation from the military is a well-documented part of the UFO phenomenon. Near Reserve, Lee Williams, Eyewitness News 4.
Okay, thank you. So that brings up, who am I? Maybe Ron Burgundy from Anchorman? So I got the hair, I got the big mustache. My daughters, when they saw this, just laughed. But such was the style. I was a reporter. I'll always be a reporter. I've done a lot of other things, but at my heart, I'm always a reporter. So as time went on, this is just down the road in Tulsa. That's our satellite truck. That's me up in the copper-colored shirt between the two guys in white, two of our photographers. And this is kind of us in our heyday at KTUL. And we would come up to this area, as the news says, you got a tornado. You had to get a tornado, giant flood or a big fire for us to come up here. But we would come up into northwest Arkansas quite a lot. It's close by, right? So I was at Channel 8 for 8 years as the manager of the news department. That's the overall manager of everyone and everything. You're responsible for everything and all the headaches that come along with that. Okay, so one thing, we've been coming to Northwest Arkansas for 27 years. That's my daughter, Allison, and we're zip-lining out near Jasper. Remember her, she's going to recur in our story, okay? My daughter, Ashton, and we're near Jasper, Arkansas. If you've ever been down there, the elks come out of the forest, out of the hills every night, and they feed on that beautiful valley there. My wife's actually been coming here longer than I have because she had an uncle here. So she's been coming since she was a little girl and remembered bathing in the river. So we have a lot of kinship to this area. So as we said, most of my career was spent as a news director for 18 years, mostly in Tulsa, Colorado Springs, Decatur. And you already covered some of the other things that I've done. But the main thing I want to call your attention to is the Albuquerque, the years 76 through 82, and especially the UFO series produced January through May 1982 with Dr. Hynek. So here is another story of that series.
In books that make a serious study of UFOs, like Dr. J. Allen Hynek's UFO Report, the name of Socorro policeman Lonnie Zamora is respected. Here in the hills southwest of Socorro in 1964, Zamora witnessed something he still cannot explain. Zamora claims to have seen small men board an oval-shaped craft and zip silently past the horizon. Zamora was the only one to see the craft, but many people saw the strange landing marks and burned bushes left behind. Zamora, a very private man, has been the victim of so much jeering, he now refuses interviews about the incident. The Socorro incident is one of the very most credible cases in UFO history. Ironically, it is only one of 3 very similar incidents that occurred in New Mexico about the same time. In La Madera, a small village north of Espanola, a man named Orlando Gallegos, since deceased, claimed to have seen a disc-shaped object on a hill behind the village. By the time state police arrived, the object was gone, but not all the evidence. Much like Socorro, burned bushes and what appeared like landing pod marks were left behind. State Police Chief Martin Vigil, then a captain, saw the marks himself. The third case has never been reported. It occurred in the remote foothills northeast of the Sandia Mountains. Local miner James Scartassini, a longtime resident of Golden, with a reputation for honesty, guided us to the location where he remembers the events of '64. In our company, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the world's foremost UFO researcher, who served as expert consultant to the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. James says 2 ranchers saw strange lights rising off the hills one night And the next morning, the ranchers found 3 burn marks spaced about 20 feet apart.
The holes about this size, right about like this, that were burned into the ground and everything. And I was really amazed because the rock was smelted like it had been in a smelter, a kiln, to smelt it, and the dirt and everything were smelted together.
And are you saying that the people from Sandia came out and just dug out the burnt spots and took them all away? Is that correct?
Yes, it was I believe it was the Air Force, or they had Air Force personnel here.
The Air Force has never told what they found on that hill. But tomorrow, we will tell you about an Air Force investigation into the giant green fireballs that haunted the New Mexico skies back in 1948. Lee Williams, Eyewitness News 4.
So about those fireballs, you probably think we had video of one of those fireballs. Actually, that's me standing off camera with a Roman candle. And simulation, okay. And the sound effect is actually me going. It's true. We had to do our special effects in a way that we could afford, but that's Albuquerque in the background. So I did get a letter. This astronomer, Lincoln La Paz, is very important because he was one of the world's foremost authorities on meteors. And he wrote me a letter. And in the letter, he says he thinks that the fireballs were not UFOs, but were actually military experiments using direct matter. Who knows what direct matter is? And there's a couple of slides. I read the definition of direct matter. I still can't. It's compressed matter. That's about all I can tell you. But he thought World War III was going to be fought with it, and it hasn't happened yet, so that's good. But I really don't understand it. But that's what he thought it was. So I would like to call your attention here. And actually, until I didn't even remember I had this letter. I mean, it's a long time ago, and the mind goes. But he talks about the work he did with Hynek at Ohio State University in the 30s and 40s. So I was going, wow, I didn't know he did that. And some people at the Center for UFO Research data bank in Albuquerque were really interested to see this letter. Everything you see today, I've turned over to them for their records and posterity. So Dr. La Paz, being a hard physical scientist, was not such a big fan of Dr. Hynek's getting sidetracked onto UFOs. He says, I regret that Dr. Hynek, has become so deeply involved with the UFOs. And that was the attitude of most physical scientists. Most of Dr. Hynek's peers thought he had gone down a rabbit hole when it came to UFOs. So it was hard for him. Anybody, when your peers think you're messing up, you're not on track, you've lost your way in the scientific world, it hurts, right? And that's something that hurt him all his life. Yet he stuck to what his conclusion was after 20 years of investigating UFO reports for the Air Force. So what did Dr. Hynek have to show for all his work? Some burn marks on the ground and some burned bushes. Well, no, he had a lot more than that. Hundreds, thousands of reports of UFOs from citizens and highly trained specialists, including our military pilots. We spend millions of dollars on these pilots to get them to where they can fly these planes, defend our country. And we're not going to believe what they say. And the answer to that is exactly correct. We're not really going to believe. In fact, we're going to ridicule them and make all the other people who might file a report shut up, just like they do in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They ask the commercial airline pilot, do you want to report that? He says, no, I don't want to report one of those. So that is the history of UFOs, because much like Lonnie Zamora here, who I talked to, he was ridiculed he quit his job as a police officer for a long time because people just made fun of him to no end. And it still happens. I just talked to our guest speaker for this afternoon, who was the radar specialist on the USS Princeton that caught a lot of the UFOs in 2004, and he said the same thing. And even in 2004, they were teased. It was very hard. It was very hard on all these people who say they've had sightings to come forward. So most don't. So Dr. Hynek had a lot more than just triangular burn marks. He had all these testimonies, multiple witnesses, multiple places, And there was, as the technology improves, right, then we have radar imagery to add to that, which I think is most impressive. And then we also have lots of photos and later videos. The photos and videos don't prove anything except that it is a compelling piece of evidence that, you know, if you have something, if you're shooting with your phone, it's shooting at 30 frames per second. So every second there are 30 pictures. And if on a couple of those pictures you have something gliding by, you probably don't see it because it goes by faster than your eye can see. But if you happen to stop a video and see something in the sky, this is evidence. And what I'm going to make the case for is that if this were before a jury of our peers, this UFO phenomena in terms of these sightings, these things in the sky, that it would be strong evidence indeed. So Dr. Hynek had all this imagery at the level that he was, but since then we've had a lot of improvements in our radars, haven't we? We've had, this is a military targeting site on side of a military jet, picked up a UFO. This has happened many times. This is from 2000, an incident in 2015. So part of the congressional hearings we had last year, which were astounding. To me, that's the biggest development in the history of UFOs as far as making the case that they're real. And then in 2021, this 60 Minutes report is available on YouTube. If you want to send anybody a report that in 12 minutes presents the best evidence for UFOs, this is it. Just go on YouTube, copy the link, send it to your friends. And these are two military pilots who went up to check out UFO because our guest this afternoon, Chief Kevin Day, the radar specialist in charge, dispatched them. Go check this weird phenomena out. And so they went over there and they saw exactly what the history of UFOs has been telling us happened. Strange craft moving at incredible speeds, going from ground to 80,000 feet in a second, incredible right turns and just appearing and disappearing. And that's all I want to say about that, because that's not what my report's about. But you're going to find out a lot more about that. If there's any lecture that you see, you got to come back this afternoon. But this, I think, starts to say Hynek did not go out down a rabbit hole. He went toward the truth. Okay, so this would be a fine place to stop and answer some questions, because next we're going to go to a different subject. But then we're going to come back to Dr. Hynek. So this, again, through the radar targeting, not the radar, but the targeting sites, the gun sites of military planes. This is the kind of imagery they got, or you might have seen things of those green tic-tac looking things that were captured by our military pilots, and many of them testified before Congress just last year. Any questions? Dr. Hynek in his quest to prove the UFO phenomena? Okay, well, there's going to be more time for questions a little bit later. Yes, ma'am.
I heard a radio interview of Dr. Alan Hynek's secretary, and she thought the government killed him because of the aggressive form of prostate cancer he had.
Huh. Jenny Randall's? Was it Jenny Randall's?
Yeah.
Okay, I have not heard that. I would tend to think it's not true myself. He was 76 years old, and he he did pass away from brain cancer. So I have not heard that. But if you heard her coming out of her own lips, she's very respectable. She is one of Dr. Hynek's insiders, and if she says it, then I've got to go listen to it. Yes. The official answer is no. He never claimed to see a UFO. Some places there's a report that he had a stereoscopic camera and shot something out of the window of a plane, but I don't really know about that. I've just seen a report. But he told me personally he's never seen never had a UFO experience, at least as he would define to be convincing enough, but he didn't go into detail. Oh, yes. Yeah, the question. Yeah. See, me being a media person should know better. So the question was, first question was Dr. Hynek somehow, did they accelerate his cancer in some government authority? And I said, I don't think so, but she heard it from Dr. Hynek's personal secretary that she thought maybe that happened. I don't have any information on that. Second question was, did Dr. Hynek ever have a sighting himself? So I hope you got that. His official answer was no. Maybe something that may have been, but he didn't say anything about that to me. I've just read accounts of that. And some of the accounts are weird. Yes?
Did Dr. Hynek ever interview an experiencer?
He did. And he did interview. Thank you. So my anxiety works to my benefit and against me sometimes. Did he ever interview an experiencer? He did. He interviewed people who had been abducted and experiencers, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, let's go one more question, then we'll move ahead.
Did he have any conclusions that he came to about what he thought was going on?
So did he have any conclusions about what he thought was going on? And I've got to say he had his own theories, and we'll get to that as well. He didn't have all the evidence we have now. All right, so we are going to take a detour here to the Roswell incident because I also covered that. Now, Dr. Hynek, I asked him when we started the series, are you interested in doing the Roswell incident? And he says, no, not really. He just shrugged it off. So he was not enthused about it, at least to do it. And maybe it's because so many people had scrutinized that story. He didn't explain it. I didn't ask him anymore. But FYI, that was his take on the Roswell incident. Was he thought there was, he wanted new stories, not stories that have been hashed over so much. So we are going to return to Dr. Hynek, but first we're going to go to something that I think is real exciting. So a question for you, is this the last interview shot with Major Jess Marcel in 1982, April 1982? I've been told it is. I don't know that it is. But I was told by a MUFON representative in St. Louis, and this was 30 years ago, that it was. So you all know the story. Major Jess Marcel picked up the strange materials off the Roswell desert. Later, they had a press conference saying, no, it's a weather balloon. That's him holding the weather balloon. And as you'll see, he says that story was fabricated.
The year was 1947, summertime. A flying saucer exploded in midair and fragments scattered to the ground on this ranch northwest of Roswell. Sound incredible? To us it does, but not to many of the people who were directly involved. The story begins with the late Mac Brazel, a tight-lipped cowboy who was a ranch foreman. One morning in early July, 35 years ago, he discovered some very strange wreckage on the ground. Stuff neither he nor anyone else who saw it had ever seen before or since, as far as we know. He told the Air Force about it, and under the direction of Major Jess Marcel, an Air Force crew gathered up every scrap. Now this next part sounds impossible, but the Air Force actually put out a news release stating they had recovered parts of a flying saucer. Eyewitness News' own outdoors reporter, Frank Joyce, may have been the first to get that news release. Back then, Frank worked for Roswell radio station KGFL. Frank says he transmitted that story on the United Press Newswire and quickly got a call from Washington.
A man identified himself as a colonel, not sure of what branch of the service, very angry, very strong in some of the things he said to me, and I replied that you can't talk to me that way because I'm a civilian. I can put out this story. He says, I'll show you what I can do. And I finally got over to him that the story did not originate with me. It came from the military, and the phone went dead, and that's the last I heard of that.
In fact, that's the last almost everyone heard of a flying saucer. High-ranking Air Force officials called in reporters and posed with the remains of a weather balloon. This, they chuckled, is what really crashed. But retired Major Jess Marcel says the balloon story was a lie. You'll remember him as the officer who recovered the wreckage from the desert. We talked with Major Marcel at his house in Houma, Louisiana, where he remains bewildered by the strange materials he once held in his hands.
Well, there were various types of materials. I said, it looks like balsa wood. It would seem lighter than balsa wood. So I got my cigarette lighter and I said, I want to see if that stuff will burn. It didn't.
Could you break it?
No. You'd pick up a big piece, it weighed nothing. You couldn't tell you had anything in your hands.
So you'd think in 1947, if the materials that he found would have been used in Teflon, well, I guess it wouldn't be Teflon, it'd be something better, in cookware and maybe buildings that weigh, a tenth of what they weigh, but not. So he was a delightful guy. He also says he couldn't puncture. There was material that was as thin as paper, and he would try to puncture it, and he couldn't. Again, material that he's never seen since. Major Marcel had a son, Jesse Marcel Jr., and when he was 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night and showed him this mysterious debris, according to Jesse Marcel Jr., his son. So you'd say, well, he's just a flaky guy, but later he became a medical doctor, a flight surgeon. He re-enlisted in the First Iraq War as a flight surgeon. He wrote a book called The Roswell Legacy and lectured, did TV interviews all over the country, and in some cases the world, saying that the stuff he once held in his hand that his father brought home was indeed like nothing he had ever seen before. So both maintained their stories for the rest of their lives. So at this point, we're going to continue with the Roswell incident, but we're moving on to the craft and the bodies. These two guys didn't have anything to do with that, okay? They just, as far as we know, they just found the mysterious debris on the desert. So when I talk about everything up to this point as demonstrable fact, what I'm actually referring to is the news release that came out and my colleague Frank Joyce report on that they did put out a news release, that's fact. That Frank Joyce got that news release, that's fact, and distributed it to the world. All those things are facts, and that's what I'm referring to. I'm not verifying that bodies were found. But this is the story that continues about the Roswell incident.
Now, the story to this point is really fascinating because of this. It is all documentable fact. Now, in the second half of this story, coming up tomorrow, it's not so clear-cut, but if the second part is true, well, the Air Force not only got some very strange materials off this desert, but they got a flying saucer and the creatures that were inside it. Near Roswell, Lee Williams, Eyewitness News 4.
This new motion picture reveals the startling proof that the government actually has the wreckage of a flying saucer and the bodies of alien astronauts.
Just another hokey space movie, or is Hangar 18 something more? The movie bears striking similarities to the story of a flying saucer crash near Roswell in 1947. In last night's story, we confirmed a lot of information that seems incredible. For example, we determined that the Air Force actually put out a news release stating they had recovered parts of a flying saucer. One-time Air Force Lieutenant Walter Haut wrote the news release himself. Eyewitness News' own outdoors reporter Frank Joyce may have been the first to get that news release. Back then, Frank worked for Roswell radio station KGFL. But the news release talked about strange wreckage, not about a whole flying saucer or alien bodies. According to the book, a saucer exploded in the air over Roswell and scattered wreckage to the ground. But most of the craft remained in the air until it crashed west of Socorro on the plain of San Augustine. Most of the speculation for the Socorro crash comes indirectly from a former U.S. soil conservation agent named Barney Barnett. As the story goes, on July 3, 1947, Barnett saw what he thought was a plane crash. But when he reached the scene, he found something literally out of this world, a wrecked flying saucer. Several biology students from the University of Pennsylvania arrived within a few minutes, and they found something even more incredible, small humanoids with large heads, appearing much like the spacemen in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. According to the story, military officers arrived at that point and told the witnesses it was their patriotic duty never to talk about what they had seen. Already there are a lot of problems with verifying this story. The biggest one is we can't talk with Barney Barnett. He died in 1969. And what about those archaeology students that were supposed to have seen it? None of them have ever surfaced. Well, if the Air Force did pick up a flying saucer out here in 1947, what did they do with it? Again, according to the book, the flying saucer and its crew were shipped here to Edwards Air Force Base in California, the same place the space shuttle lands today. There, a crew of top scientists took apart both the craft and the aliens to find out what made them tick. Then, in the late 1950s, the authors say, the craft and the creatures were probably transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, where they may still be on ice in Hangar 18. Lee Williams, Eyewitness News 4.
It's important to note that both father and son were promoted to colonel. They were credible when they did their account, and they're credible through their military careers, and the story that they both told consistently for the rest of their lives is what it is. I didn't know so much about the son. I'd heard that there's something about him seeing the materials, but when I looked into it for this presentation, I was very surprised that he was such a credible guy and had gone to these lengths to write his own book about this. So this would be a good place to ask questions about the Roswell incident. I'm not an expert on it. I'm pretty well versed on, as you saw, but we're going to go back to Dr. Hynek now. You can always ask me questions about it at the end. Any questions about these stories about the Roswell incident? And I'll remember to repeat your question if you're so brave. Okay, people feel like they pretty much, yes, sir.
Al O'Donnell, what did Dr. Hynek think of him in his deathbed testimony?
Al O'Donnell. MacDonald?
O'Donnell, he tested and
Okay.
fired 186 nuclear warheads.
Okay, I'm sorry I don't know him. I know there's a scientist named MacDonald who was, believed that UFOs were real, who was a lot more zealous than Dr. Hynek. Dr. Hynek, he pressed Dr. Hynek to say more and thought Dr. Hynek was withholding important information. And Dr. Hynek always took a much more conservative approach went into what he would say. He was very cautious because while he wanted to tell the UFO mystery, he also wanted to keep his scientific credentials. And so he progressed very slowly. So Dr. Hynek's take was there's a phenomena out there. The phenomena is real in that people are actually experiencing it, and we must study this, if for no other reason than our military security. We've got to see what this is zipping around our airspace. And that's really was his main conclusion. And Dr. MacDonald thought he should go. There's evidence for much more. Another question about Roswell before we push on? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. What brought the craft down? Was it a lightning strike? What happened?
I have no idea. Yeah. I don't even know if there was a craft. And if there was, I don't know what brought it down. There's a lot of compelling information, though, isn't there? Any other question about the Roswell incident? If you do, I'll remember to repeat your question. I'm going to hold this up.
Did Hynek ever bring up the subject of MJ-12?
MJ-12. So the question is, did Hynek ever bring up the subject of MJ-12? I can't tell you specifically about MJ-12. He brought up a lot of released documents and things like this, with all the things crossed out of them. A lot of cases. I don't remember him specifically addressing MJ-12. Nothing? Okay. All right, let's go back to our adventure with Dr. Hynek. Okay, serious scientist, always. The question is, do we live in a spiritual universe? And I did put a question mark on that because I don't want to put words in Dr. Hynek's mouth. And this is what he thought about UFOs. So in telling a broader story of Dr. Hynek's life, this is him with Neil Armstrong. Yes, that Neil Armstrong. In 1973, for 2 weeks, they boarded a ship out of New York and went off the coast of Central Africa in 1973 to see what? Anybody know? I'm hearing the eclipse. So in 1973, they traveled together to see the eclipse, and a lot of other scientists and people on board. And Neil Armstrong could have sat with anybody he wished. His son Paul Hynek, in an interview, said he specifically chose to sit with Dr. J. Allen. So he had an interest also in UFOs, and his son said they talked about it quite a bit, and also just had a good time. He said the kids played with each other's kids, and he remembers it as a grand old time on this adventure as they went to view a total eclipse off the coast of Africa. It was the largest eclipse as far as the shadow on the ground, according to what I read, of any eclipse since the one we had just last week. So anyway, Dr. Hynek was a very social guy. He liked to have people over. They talked about everything from science to reincarnation, and he liked people. He liked to find out about them and talk about the whole gamut of possibilities, not just the confines of science. I put this picture in because I like it. It shows the Dr. Hynek more that I met and that I knew. When I said, a person who's intrigued, who's engaged in life and happy about it, this really expresses that. I think what expresses it more is these are still frames from my report. And so now, we're starting to get a guy with a big smile, and there he is with his pipe. He always had his pipe. But a charming guy who had a lot of joy in his life, a lot of childlike wonder about the world, despite the fact that he was as hard a scientist as they come. He was quite a delightful person. So these are two books that Dr. Hynek signed for me. This Close Encounters, from the question we had earlier about abductions and these kinds of things, be sure and ask me about that again at the end. His second book is probably his most famous, UFO Experience, Close Encounters of the First Kind, Second Kind, and the Third Kind. First kind is you see something within 500 feet. Second kind is there's burn marks left, like the burn marks on the desert. That's the second kind. Third kind is you're actually in the proximity of a being, okay? And then that would include contactees and abductees as well. So he designated three kinds of UFOs, and Stephen Spielberg paid him for that title. Dr. Hynek said he home one day, letter comes in the mail. He opens it up, a check for $3,000 from Stephen Spielberg's company, paying him for that title. And of course, he was the technical advisor to that movie as well, and you saw his cameo already. Since then, there have been his close colleague, Dr. Jacques Vallée, added the term Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, which would include abductions, okay? And there's the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which includes communications. But Dr. Hynek's three classifications are how he tried to bring order to all these reports. Is it this kind, that kind? He didn't really notice that first kind didn't include things seen in the air. He wanted to see them, whatever it was, had to be within 500 feet. Not that he didn't respect the ones in the air. And then this was his follow-up book. So he wrote me a nice note. I didn't know until last month. I remembered he had signed them, but I didn't know he said something nice about me. And so this did make my heart sing, because I've had two great adventures in my life. One was with, I spent 2 weeks with a Navajo medicine man in Arizona, and this adventure with Dr. Hynek. I don't know how to sort those two out, but they were one of the biggest adventures in my life.
In 1961, this capsule, now on display at the Space Hall of Fame in Alamogordo, rocketed our first relative into space. His name was Ham, a chimpanzee. The next thing we knew, man was dangling over Earth. And less than a decade after we had chimp in space, we got man on moon. As fast as we have progressed, what could a race 1,000,000 years ahead of us do? The known universe holds millions of planets that appear able to support life. And most people who believe in UFOs think they are coming from some advanced world. But there are other theories. One of the UFO witnesses we interviewed, Alma Hobbs of Reserve, New Mexico, was told by some religious fundamentalist that the devil made her see a UFO because she's not a regular churchgoer. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the world-renowned UFO researcher, does not think much of the devil theory. But then he doesn't think much of the spaceman theory either. As an astronomer, Dr. Hynek is aware of the tremendous distances that must be traversed for space travel. The nearest star is 200 million times further than our own moon. Dr. Hynek fears it's too far ever to reach.
All the great religions of the world for centuries upon centuries have been telling us that the physical world that we see around us is not the sum total of our environment. In other words, there may be right around us, right in this room, a hidden reality that our five senses can't see.
Dr. Hynek has been chasing UFOs for more than 3 decades, but he really came to fame as the expert consultant to the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Sadly, Dr. Hynek has never had a close encounter himself.
If one day Dr. Hynek is walking out and this strange saucer-shaped craft appears, and some small creatures about 4 foot tall get out in motion to come over, what would he do?
I would definitely go in. I would consider it my scientific duty and obligation. However, you never know what you're going to do until it actually occurs. I might run like hell.
So I think you get a sense of, a much better sense of what he was like as a good human being. Dr. Hynek did hold, first of all, there's a scientific theory, and then there's a spiritual belief. So as I said, he's bound by the laws of physics in what he thinks. He doesn't see these beings, intelligent, non-human intelligence, I think the term used, being from another planet. He said the distance for him was just physically too far. He didn't see that technology gap ever being able to be breached by anything that he knew. So he didn't think that's the most likely explanation. But luckily we have quantum physics, right? The theories of quantum physics. So I couldn't explain direct matter. Don't expect me to explain quantum physics. Except that it does talk about a multi-dimensional universe as being a possibility. By scientific theory and mathematics that our geniuses are able to do, it does speak that the universe may be multi-dimensional, that there are multiple realities, maybe in multiple times. And so he saw more, he theorized more that the creatures were coming from a multi-dimensional reality. He spoke about the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. The Cheshire Cat comes in, says a lot of weird stuff, and then blinks out. And thought that was very much like the UFO phenomena, as well as what we say about angels and many other things in our spiritual beliefs and folklore. Spiritually, he was open to a spiritual universe, and maybe it tied with quantum physics. We never tied the two together. But he did hold the possibility that there was a higher intelligence that permeated the universe. He said, well, it wasn't, I don't believe it's an old man with a beard and, like that. I don't believe it's that. But he did believe that there was, he held open the possibility that there was a guiding intelligence to the universe. He went to retreats for Rosicrucians. I don't know if anybody knows who the Rosicrucians are. You might call them a esoteric Christianity or an enlightened Christianity. I think fundamentalists would call them damaged at best Christianity, or maybe not Christianity at all. But he did go to, he told me he went to 2 retreats, and I heard his son talk about it on the same recording. So he was open to that and would go into a meditative experience. He said, well, nobody knew who I was. They had no idea who I was. But he'd go to these retreats and have these meditative experiences. And that's probably the most I can say about, as much as I know about his spiritual practices and beliefs. But it did open the possibility for higher intelligences. So how we met. Pretty unusual story. So how we met is going to have to go back to 1976 at the Waco airport. That is actually me on the right, and the guy in the center is my bureau chief, Don Marion, who is the toughest boss I ever had. Oh, he kicked my ass. But he whipped me into shape really fast so that once I left Waco, I was able to function well as a journeyman reporter. By the way, we're waiting for Ronald Reagan to arrive at the Waco airport, is what that is on one of his quick hopping tours through small cities. So it was actually Don who made the connection. So we're going to jump forward now. So the stories with Dr. Hynek were in '82, but by this, in 1981, Don had moved on to KHJ TV in Los Angeles. Who should appear on their program except Dr. J. Allen Hynek? So afterward, Don chatted him up. Don had been like the promotion director for NBC in Chicago. He wasn't afraid of stars, and he knew a heck of a lot about UFOs. He's one of the most well-read people I've ever known. So they talked, and Dr. Hynek somewhere in there said, "Hey, I'm traveling, going to Albuquerque." And Don says, "Well, you've got to look up my friend, his investigative reporter in Albuquerque." So one evening, I get a call from Dr. J. Allen Hynek, out of the blue. I don't remember that Don told me that he had told him that. Maybe he did. But anyway, it was a total shock when I got this call from Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And I will let you theorize here yourself, or just guess. Just guess. If you want to have some fun with me, just guess why he called me. And I will repeat the question if you guys dare to talk about something you have no way of knowing whatsoever. Was it because I was a reporter at KOB, one station in the media market in Albuquerque, and he was a world-famous guy? That's a good answer. I like to think that's true. It's not. So the answer is very human. He traveled the world a lot. He hated to eat alone. Sweet, huh? So that's why he called me, just for company for dinner. In the course of that dinner, we talked about doing a UFO series. He actually had an observatory in southern New Mexico that he came to visit from time to time. And so it worked out that he was coming back and agreed to do this series of stories. And that is what we've seen to this point, is that series of stories. All right, so the pictures you see is May. It's somewhere in the time frame of April, March 1982 when I was doing these interviews. The stories aired 2 months later in May of '82. So this is May of '82. We're going to jump forward 12 years now, okay? You ready? Here we go, through the magic of time travel. Here we are in 1994, and this is where my daughter, remember my daughter in the harness for ziplining? Well, when she was 3 years old, she was hell on wheels, I got to tell you. Every morning was a fight. Every morning was a fight to get ready, to get out the door, to eat breakfast. It was just, she was going to get her pound of flesh and her quart of blood every morning. So she fried my wife and me every single morning. So finally, I would do that, and then I'd go into my morning news meeting, and I was just frazzled. So I started setting aside 10 minutes. At the TV station, there was a parking lot, and just in front of the parking lot was a nice little pond. So I'd pull my car up at the pond, look at that, and relax or meditate for about 10 minutes, let my thoughts flow, calm down. And one morning when I was doing that, it popped into my head that for my master's project at the University of Illinois Springfield, I could write a biography of Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So my daughter, being a little brat, is directly responsible for me writing. So now we're talking about writing a screenplay based on Dr. J. Allen Hynek's exploits. So to do that, I had to go to the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois. And so all this is 1994, okay? I did write a screenplay, which resulted in me getting my master's degree. I wanted to cover the most important UFO investigations and show the transition that Dr. Hynek had from a UFO skeptic, if not a downright debunker of UFOs. He's kind of doing the Air Force's bidding by coming up with whatever explanation that he thought might be plausible to try and help explain these UFO cases. But over the years, he saw more and more pilots, more and more credible people, and across those years from 48 for the next decade, his viewpoint began to change. He said, well, wait a minute, these are credible people. At a minimum, they're experiencing some kind of mass hysteria or mass hallucination that's maybe common to the human species, right? Because we get people who've seen leprechauns throughout history and angels. Maybe it's part of that. Maybe it's part of folklore, and once it gets in people's mind, more and more people see it. Maybe that's what it is. That would be a minimum for him. But that's also an important phenomena if we as a species are made to, kind of like the AI that says they create illusions. Sometimes they create false stories in the AI, that we create these stories based on our experiences. That's significant, but it's a lot more significant if they're really there, if there really are craft in our skies and on the ground. So he transitioned by the early 60s that he no longer was really a UFO doubter. But he stayed with the government so he could get the evidence. So they'd send him the reports and he could look at them and start his scientific investigations into the UFO phenomena. So in 1969, Project Blue Book ended, and then he went on to form his own Center for UFO Studies, where he did state publicly before this as well that the UFO phenomena is real. Now, what is it? I don't know, but it's real. And we better study it to find out what it is. So as for my screenplay, the military officers are coming to his university, and he says, I'm an astrophysicist. Why do you ask me about UFOs? And the colonel says, we'll get to that. First, we'd like to know what you think about flying saucers. What do you think about the phenomena? And Hynek goes on to say, in the words that I put in his mouth, that I think the phenomena is between the ears of the beholder. Pretty good line. I made that up. But it is consistent with what Dr. Hynek would have said. He didn't think in the beginning that people were having a real experience. Okay, so now I'm going to explain a little bit more about my friend Don Marion and we're doing the interview with Dr. Hynek. We already covered that, and that's how they met. So when I went to the Center for UFO Studies in 1994, I came into a room that was about, this would be good. There were cassette tapes all across, this is the length of this, and went all the way to the wall for 15 feet. There were at least 200 cassette tapes there. And so I'm looking at these and I'm going, wow, where do I begin? How long will it take me to listen to all these tapes? And where do I begin? And I reached down in front of me, picked up the first tape, and the tape was a recording that Dr. Hynek made of a phone call with my friend Don Marion. So what a coincidence, eh? first tape out of 200 or 300 that I touched. And Don knew a lot. I guess he impressed Dr. Hynek enough that Hynek called him back. Don tended to think, he was a former Air Force intelligence officer, that a lot of the UFO cases were actually the military trying to cover up some kind of accident, some kind of spill they made. Like on that hill, the burn marks could well have been something they crashed there, and they ran out and cleaned it up. So he tended to think that that the military often used UFOs to cover up a serious mistake or spill. So that's part of that intrigue. So I won't kid you that Dr. Hynek, that this relationship was one of the most special things that I've ever had. If I'm going to be known for anything throughout my entire reporting and news management career of 30 years, I know that it's going to be because of this series that I did. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today, and you wouldn't be listening to me, right? So it was a special connection. And I wouldn't say I was good friends with Dr. Hynek. I think we became friends. He liked having a younger person he talked about all kinds of things, women, mysteries, this kind of stuff. And we were together. As a matter of fact, I was in his association for about 3 years after that. I'd moved to Phoenix, and he had an English wealthy man. We all had breakfast in Phoenix. And the thought was that this man might fund a proper study of UFOs. So he traveled. Dr. Hynek moved to Scottsdale thinking the money was to come. It didn't. But that was kind of near the end. So I was in association with Dr. Hynek for about more than 3 years. Dr. Hynek died on April 27th, 1986, as we already know. He died of a brain tumor. He did have an operation and lasted a while after that. Could walk and talk, but his mind wasn't, there were literally pieces of it gone. Before he died, his wife, Mimi, drove him out of Scottsdale out to the dark desert, and they observed Halley's Comet. So Dr. Hynek literally went out with the comet. If you'd like to help the Center for UFO Studies, it's still in existence. The bi-monthly publication, International UFO Reporter, is one of the best places to get UFO information from credible researchers. And so you can subscribe to that. Just look at it online. Dr. Mark Rodiger, who was Dr. Hynek's associate way back into the early 80s, is now the director. So he's also one of my heroes. He's been keeping the UFO Reporter alive for 4 decades now. So Dr. Hynek was just a special guy. He braved fighting the government, and he braved fighting his peers, who said he'd gotten sidetracked went down a rabbit hole. So one of the most impressive things to me about today and about this year we just passed of 2023 is we've seen the most evidence that we've ever seen for UFOs. Remember that radar? It's gotten a lot better. And as it's gotten a lot better, we've captured, the Navy, this afternoon when Senior Chief Kevin Day talks to you, you'll learn one of, if not the most significant case of when military pilots chased UFOs. He was in charge of the radar, tracked on radar, and in the military gun sights. So to me, as of maybe 2004 when this case happened, or maybe 2023, just last year in the congressional hearings, when we saw incredible experts come to testify that there are strange things in the sky, even the Pentagon admitting we don't know what they are, we don't know what to do about them. And this is all part of that 60 Minutes report. To me, this marks the vindication of Dr. J. Allen Hynek as a brave scientist who told the truth when no one else knew what he knew. So this would be another place for a few questions. I see you way over there.
What case or cases did Dr. Hynek find particularly compelling?
Good answer. Well, the one you saw with Lonnie and Samora was one of them. What cases did Dr. Hynek find particularly compelling? And maybe we'll jump over to abductions now, or contactees, or people who had close encounters of the second kind, where there's burn marks left. Certainly the case with Lonnie Samora, he interviewed him a number of times. He had great respect for Lonnie Samora. And there was physical evidence. There were the burn marks left there. He interviewed Betty and Barney Hill, our first major abduction case that we knew of. And this in 1959 is when that happened. He later interviewed them. He found them very credible. Now, he didn't say, boy, they're right, but he believed they'd had a credible experience. And he treated people who thought they had abductions, or maybe they did, with great kindness. And he knew that these people were ridiculed, and he thought that was so wrong, both the military pilots and just the regular folks. 1961, Father William Gill in Papua New Guinea. He was an Anglican priest, and over 2 nights, a UFO hovered above their village with a couple of dozen villagers there, and there was kind of described as a platform, and the beings came out and looked down. They seemed kind of luminescent, according to Father Gill. And one time, Father Gill waves at them, and he said one of the beings seemed to wave back. And then the same thing occurred the next night. He actually thought it was the U.S. government doing some kind of experiments. So Dr. Hynek traveled down there in the 1970s. He interviewed separate witnesses at separate locations. He interviewed the villagers who were there, and he traveled then to Australia to interview the priest, Father William, and found him a very meticulous and very credible witness, Father William Gills. That was one of his most credible cases. He valued the fishermen in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973, and his position, why would regular people not get to be respected just because maybe they weren't well educated or well spoken? But I understand Calvin Parker, one of those witnesses, has spoken here before. And they were terrorized, taken inside a craft and terrorized, according to their story. There's a little recording of their interrogation or online. And then the Travis Walton case, Paul Hynek said Travis Walton was a guest in their house, and Dr. Hynek talked to him a number of times. So those were some of the most credible cases that he relayed to me personally. So I'm sure there are others, but I didn't get to hear them out of the horse's mouth. Another question? How are we doing on time? I got a little bit more. 101. 20 minutes. Perfect. Perfect. How I wish I'd timed this thing before I got here. Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that you thought maybe the UFO crashes or other incidents, cover-up for other instances.
Were other what?
Cover-ups for other incidents.
Oh, I just said that. No, I just said that I'm going to have to repeat your question first, is what I just said. At least I'm consistent. I've got the kind of brain that once it's wrong, it's wrong. It's not coming back. So a cover-up for other instances. I think Dr. Hynek would have speculated about that. That's my friend Don Marion, who had looked into some cases, and being a former Air Force intelligence guy, he knew cover-up stuff. So that was his theory, that some were, that they the government might make up UFO stories to cover something that was a serious screw up, like maybe no evidence of this, maybe if a nuclear bomb or some kind of chemicals they say, oh, it's a UFO, and everybody be scrambling about UFOs instead of looking into what actually happened. That was his theory. Ma'am, right next to you, did you have a question?
I was just trying to get.
Oh, you're trying to get, okay, yes, I'm going to repeat his question. Look, watch. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering the series on TV, Project Blue, how realistic or accurate was that series and the individual?
I'm reminding myself, the series, the TV show on the History Channel, Project Blue Book, how accurate was that? Well, a lot of them were actual cases that Dr. Hynek worked on. I was glad to see that his life was getting some notice, but I watched 2 episodes, and I'd like to see the rest, but that's all I could stand, because at the end of both episodes, a UFO passes over their head. They're going, whoa, there it is. He never saw a UFO. So I think a lot of the cases are absolutely legit, but, you know, they had to Hollywood up. We can't have him not actually see a UFO for his entire life. So that ruined it for me. Yes.
There was a television program, Project Blue Book, in the 70s from maybe NBC.
Okay.
I forget maybe what he's asking about.
Is that, were you talking about the History Channel? Yeah. So on the History Channel, they just did a TV series based on Dr. Hynek's life. And so they reenacted a lot of the cases. But the problem was they couldn't help not showing a UFO, not showing up some CGI UFO. It just didn't happen. Yeah.
The 70s version was...
Okay. We're talking about the 70s version of Project Blue Book TV show.
Yeah. Was it accurate? It was...
I don't know it. I don't remember it. I couldn't tell you.
I was a little kid, so I don't remember that all either. But
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, that was actually my question. Project UFO 78-79, produced by Jack Webb. It seemed to be a blatant cover-up from the beginning. U.S. Air Force officers always went out and had beautiful footage of what looked like a real UFO, and they inevitably ended up swamp gas, Venus, all the usual suspects, and they debunked it every single time. And even in 78, 79, it was so transparent.
Yeah.
The Air Force, and I thought, well, they listed J. Allen Hynek at one point as a technical director for that show. So I was going to ask you if you knew anything about it.
Not specifically. I mean, I know the cases you're talking about. I know the kinds of things that happened. I know the kinds of, he did come out, I was going to bring up, Dr. Hynek did offer the explanation of swamp gas for a Michigan UFO sighting, which former President Gerald Ford, when he was a congressman, took him to task for, and they had hearings in the state. And Dr. Hynek always regretted that. He knew that he was there to do his best to explain things. And while it was not totally incredible to say swamp gas, it was possible. It wasn't likely. He knew he screwed up on that. But his role was to find explanations. And so he said, well, maybe this and maybe that. But let's keep in mind in the grand thing that once he did see enough evidence, he became the world's foremost UFO scientist, championing that UFOs are real. Yes, ma'am.
Was there one specific event that flipped him? Or was it just
So the question is, was there one specific event that flipped him? Not that I know of. I know he thought an awful lot of Lonnie Samora. He thought an awful lot about Father Gill. For cases where there are multiple witnesses in multiple locations, of which he investigated many. The Hudson Valley UFO incident, he was co-author of that. So I couldn't tell you any one. I think like any scientist, it's the accumulation of consistent knowledge over time that swayed him. No particular incident. The question, yes, sir. He said, Okay. Oh, wait just a second. So I ruined your question with my joke. Okay.
You had a chance to read The Day After Roswell that was written based on an interview with Lieutenant Philip James
Corso. I know of Corso's work. I have one of his books. I'm going to be honest with you. Since 1982, I've not been very involved in the UFO world. Now, I've always followed cases, a case in Phoenix and some of these big cases with rapt attention and interest. But I made a decision back in 1982. I saw people who had been investigating, hard charging this UFO mystery for 30 years, and I said, do I want to be one of those people, or do I want to go on to kind of a semi-normal life, which is what I chose? I've always been very interested, but the congressional hearings from this past year is why I've re-entered the scene here. Plus, I retired and I have time to mess with it. So I can't. I have not read that particular book, and I haven't read a lot of books, but I have read a lot of books, but not that one. Other question?
Yes, was Dr. Hynek ever threatened for his work?
Was Dr. Hynek ever threatened for his work? Not to my knowledge. He was, I think people tried to belittle him. You know, there's death by being ostracized. Being ostracized is awfully painful. He wasn't ever exactly ostracized, but there were major scientists that said he was, if you don't mind me saying so, off track, full of crap. I got one. How much time do I have left? 5? 13 minutes, excellent. So again, because of Sputnik, Smithsonian Astronomical Observatory, his credentials were too strong for anyone to tear him down. But there were lots of people that thought he was off track. He'd gotten lost over in the UFO crazies, and really only he was in a position to know the most about it. So no, I don't know anybody who threatened him.
Lee, you want to continue with Q&A for a little bit longer?
Just how about 2 more questions, and I have one little finisher for you.
Okay, if you want to ask a question, please come up here so we can get you on camera.
Oh, I knew there was...
hear you better.
See,
and I'm sorry I wasn't up here when you went to Q&A.
That's okay.
I got caught down in the vendor area.
It's no problem. I remembered every time to repeat the question, so that's okay. How about 2 more questions, and then I'll cap it off here. Or just cap it off.
Oh, I didn't mean to silence you, for God's sakes. Come on up and ask questions.
Okay, so I'll still take questions even though I'm walking up here. No last question? Somebody got to have something. Okay, very good. Then the presentation's been that thorough. Okay, get ready for a Hynek Extra Screenplay Hynek Blue Book. Can you guys see that okay? Some big people in the back maybe not be able to. So this is my screenplay that I wrote. Remember the trip to the Center for UFO Studies, and then I wrote it, and finally I wrote it in 1996. Hynek Blue Book, exterior Chicago, Czech neighborhood, 1910. Baby's room night. The mother and father come into the room and start to dress the baby in a beautiful gown, as if the baby were going to a christening. The gown is long and covered with lace. They tenderly button each tiny pearl button. We continue to hear the adoring tones of their voices as they lovingly pay attention to each detail. Stairs. The loving parents start walking upstairs with their proud bundle, flight after flight. Finally, they emerge out of breath and joyously onto the roof. The mother says, "Where is it?" And they look around. The mother says, "There it is, Father, Halley's Comet, a good sign." Mother says, "A blessing." The father holds the baby up over his head as far as he can stretch and says, "God, we have come from Czechoslovakia with little more than hope and belief in you. In the presence of Halley's Comet and all the stars in the skies, we pray you bless the first Hynek born in America. God, please welcome to your universe, Joseph Allen Hynek." So, I didn't plan to get emotional, but so the birth of, yes, Dr. Hynek came in with the comet, like Mark Twain, just 100 years later, and he went out with the comet. And the birth of J. Allen Hynek is a good place to end our journey today as I can think of. So thank you.